The air in the Louisiana cypress swamps hung thick and heavy, a humid embrace scented with damp earth, decaying leaves, and the faint sweet perfume of unseen night-blooming jasmine. Spanish moss, like spectral drapery, draped from ancient cypress trees, their gnarled knees rising from the murky water. The sunlight, when it managed to pierce the dense canopy, fractured into emerald shards, dancing on the surface of the bayou where alligators, ancient and silent, lay submerged. It was a place of breathtaking primeval beauty, but one that held an undeniable, almost predatory stillness. Chloe Miller, with her sun-streaked hair and an adventurer's glint in her eyes, adjusted the strap of her well-worn backpack. A senior at Louisiana State University, she was the unofficial leader of their small group, a natural magnet for anyone passionate about conservation. She was here for the rare orchids, for the silent hum of biodiversity, for the story waiting to be told in every unfurling fern. Beside her, Layla Khan, sharp-witted and impeccably organized even in the wilderness, consulted her laminated map. Layla, originally from the bustling suburbs of Chicago, had a surprising reverence for the wild, her urban savvy blending unexpectedly with an almost spiritual appreciation for untouched landscapes. She kept them on schedule, her keen eyes missing nothing. Trailing slightly, Maya Jenkins moved with a quieter grace, her camera often raised, capturing the subtle interplay of light and shadow, the intricate details of a spiderweb, the fleeting flight of a heron. Maya saw the world through a poet's lens, documenting their journey not just with images, but with observations. She meticulously jotted down, in a worn leather-bound journal, a constant companion since childhood. And then there was Brooke Harrison, the pragmatic one, her skepticism a useful counterpoint to Chloe's boundless enthusiasm. Brooke, with her sensible hiking boots and no-nonsense ponytail, was the grounding force, always asking the practical questions, always checking their supplies. She wasn't one for flowery words, but her loyalty to her friends ran deep as the roots of the ancient cypresses around them. They were 4 days into their Evergreen Expeditions volunteer trip, a program advertised as vital for wetland preservation. Their mission, to survey a remote, rarely visited section of the cypress swamps, identifying and documenting invasive species for a university research paper. The solitude had been invigorating, the work challenging but fulfilling. Cell service, as expected, had been spotty, but they'd managed to send occasional updates to their families. The last call came from Chloe's phone, a shaky connection that barely held. It was Tuesday evening, the light fading fast, painting the water in hues of bruised purple and deep crimson. Eleanor Miller, Chloe's mother, was weeding her prize-winning hydrangeas in Savannah, Georgia, when her phone buzzed. "Hey, Mom, just checking in," Chloe's voice crackled, distant and slightly distorted by the swamp's natural dampener. "We're almost done for the day. Found some incredible—" Wait, what was that? A sudden sharp metallic clang like a dropped tool hitting something hard, ripped through the line. Chloe's voice became muffled, as if she'd dropped the phone or covered the mouthpiece. Eleanor frowned, pulling the phone closer to her ear. "Chloe, what was that? Are you all right?" Silence, a low hum, then a faint splash. "Chloe, can you hear me?" Eleanor called out, her heart beginning to pound a slow, insistent rhythm against her ribs. The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the phone, a cold dread seeping into her bones. She tried calling back. No answer. She tried again and again, until the automated voice informed her the subscriber was unavailable. She called Layla's, Maya's, Brooke's phones. All went straight to voicemail. Hours later, the panic had escalated into a full-blown crisis. Calls to Evergreen Expeditions went unanswered or met with vague assurances that the group was in a remote area. The university, initially calm, grew increasingly concerned as the night deepened and no contact was made. Zara Khan, Layla's mother, an Atlanta attorney who usually commanded every room she entered, felt a tremor of fear she hadn't experienced since Layla was a toddler. Sarah Jenkins, Maya's mother, a history professor, found herself unable to construct a coherent thought, her mind a dizzying swirl of worst-case scenarios. And Vivian Harrison, Brooke's artistic mother, usually so serene, paced her rural home like a caged animal, her hands twisting the frayed edges of her favorite painting smock. The next morning, the local sheriff's department, alerted by the university and the increasingly frantic mothers, began a preliminary search. But the vast, sprawling cypress swamps of Louisiana were notoriously unforgiving, a labyrinth of water and whispering trees that held its secrets tightly. The news reports were brief, almost dismissive at first. 4 LSU students overdue from volunteer trip in swamp. But for the mothers, the words carried the weight of 1,000 unanswered prayers, a silent, chilling echo of that final broken call. The search had begun. The truth, however, lay buried deeper than any swamp creature waiting for a desperate love to unearth it. The air in Eleanor Miller's quaint Savannah home was thick with an unspoken grief, a silent counterpart to the humid coastal breeze that drifted through the open windows. 4 months had passed since Chloe's last fractured call from the Louisiana swamps. 4 months since the bright, vibrant threads of their daughters' lives had simply vanished, leaving behind only gaping holes. Around Eleanor's antique dining table, usually reserved for boisterous holiday gatherings, sat the 4 mothers, united by a bond forged in shared terror and an unyielding, desperate hope. Eleanor, usually so meticulous with her rose garden, looked as wilted as a bloom-denied water. Dark shadows smudged beneath her eyes, and her usually neatly pinned hair had escaped its confines, framing a face etched with worry. Opposite her, Zara Khan, whose sharp intellect and commanding presence had always been her armor, now looked fragile. Her tailored suits had been replaced by faded sweats, her meticulously styled hair by a hastily tied bun. She clutched a mug of cold coffee, her knuckles white. Sarah Jenkins, a historian by trade, was hunched over a scattering of maps, her fingers tracing the serpentine paths of the Louisiana bayous. She would pause, her brow furrowed, as if trying to read the answers hidden within the contours of the land itself. Her usually articulate speech was now punctuated by sighs, and her eyes, accustomed to seeking patterns in the past, were now desperately trying to decipher the present. Vivian Harrison, the artist, sat silently. Her hands, usually stained with paint, now rested in her lap, twisting the delicate silver bracelet Brooke had given her for her last birthday. While the other mothers often erupted in frustrated outbursts, Vivian's despair was a quiet internal storm, a constant ache beneath her composed exterior. The table was a chaotic landscape of their desperation, crumpled newspaper clippings detailing the initial, brief search efforts, faded photographs of their smiling daughters, printouts of grainy satellite images of the vast, indifferent swamp. There were contact lists for local sheriffs, FBI field offices, and even private investigators they'd drained their savings to hire. Each piece of paper was a testament to countless dead ends, sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of unanswered questions. They kept saying it was a remote area, Eleanor murmured, her voice raspy, picking up a clipping that announced the formal suspension of the active ground search after 2 weeks. Difficult terrain. No signs of foul play? As if the swamp just swallowed them whole without a trace. Zara slammed her mug down, a sudden sharp sound. No signs of foul play? What did they expect to find? A confession note tacked to a cypress tree. We've pushed them, called every senator, every congressperson, and all we get are platitudes and assurances that they're following every lead. Her voice cracked on the last word, the legal precision giving way to raw emotion. The early days had been a blur of frantic phone calls, tearful pleas to local authorities, and the agonizing wait for news that never came. We've found no evidence at the last known coordinates, An FBI agent had told them, his voice calm, almost detached, over a conference call a month into the search. No signs of struggle, no personal items left behind. The trail, regrettably, has gone cold. Cold. The word echoed in their minds, a chilling pronouncement that felt like a death knell. But for these mothers, cold was not an option. Cold meant giving up, and they would sooner tear the swamp apart with their bare hands than surrender to the crushing silence. Sarah traced a finger over a picture of Maya, her vibrant smile a stark contrast to the despair in the room. The university was so quick to wash their hands of it, too. Evergreen Expeditions is an independent entity, Ms. Jenkins. Our students participate at their own risk. Risk? My daughter went to help, to learn, not to vanish into thin air. Her voice rose, tinged with the bitterness that 4 months of fruitless searching had cultivated. Vivian, finally speaking, her voice soft but firm, said, "We knew from day one that if anything was to be found, it would be because of us. Their professionalism has limits. Our love, however, has none." Her gaze, though weary, held a steely glint, reflecting the unwavering resolve that pulsed through their small, heartbroken circle. Every failed lead, every patronizing dismissal, every sleepless night only hardened their resolve, forging their individual grief into a collective, burning determination. The world might have moved on, but for them, time had stopped the moment that last call from Chloe had dissolved into silence. And they would not rest until they had answers. The heavy silence in Eleanor's dining room was abruptly shattered by the insistent trill of her phone. All 4 women flinched, their eyes darting to the offending device as if it held the power to deliver either salvation or another blow. Eleanor, her hand trembling, picked it up, her voice a fragile whisper. "Hello?" Her eyes, dull with exhaustion, widened with each passing second, reflecting a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then a raw, impossible surge of hope. She pressed the phone tighter to her ear, her other hand instinctively gripping the edge of the table. "Yes, Agent, we're here." She mouthed the words FBI to the others, their collective gaze now fixed on her, breaths held in unison. "Mrs. Miller," Agent David Hayes's voice came through, clipped and precise, lacking its usual weary undertone. "This is Agent Hayes. We just received a call from the port of New Orleans. A storage container, one that shouldn't have been there, was discovered during a routine inventory check on a seldom-used section of the docks. A clerk noticed a peculiar odor, and then a discrepancy in its manifest. Upon opening it for inspection, they found something." A shiver, not of cold, but of a premonition, ran down Eleanor's spine. "Something! What did they find, Agent?" Her voice was barely audible, yet held a fierce urgency. Hayes paused, and the silence on the line stretched, amplifying the tension in the room. "Mrs. Miller, they found personal effects, items that appeared to belong to your daughters. Chloe, Layla, Maya, and Brooke." The words hit like a physical blow, yet they carried with them the first real breath of air in 4 long, suffocating months. Sarah gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Zara's eyes welled up, but instead of tears, a fierce light ignited within them. Vivian's trembling hand stilled, her gaze locking onto Eleanor's. Agent Hayes continued, his voice now imbued with a sense of guarded professionalism that still betrayed a hint of discovery. "It's early, but preliminary findings suggest the container had been sealed for some time. There are indications that individuals may have been confined inside. We have secured the scene and are sending a forensics team. We need you all to come to New Orleans immediately for identification." Eleanor didn't hesitate. Her gaze swept across the faces of the other mothers, seeing their shock, their fear, but most of all, their undeniable, resurrected hope. "We're on our way," she declared, her voice stronger than it had been in months, laced with an almost desperate determination. "Tell us where to go. We'll be there as fast as humanly possible." Less than an hour later, they were in Eleanor's car, a whirlwind of nervous energy. The maps and clippings were tossed haphazardly onto the back seat, replaced by a single, focused destination. Zara, ever the pragmatist, had already booked the earliest possible flight for them all, a small private jet she had access to through a client. The drive to the airport was a blur of hurried phone calls to their contacts, informing them of the break, but sharing little else. The weight of the world still pressed down, but now a pinprick of light had appeared in the crushing darkness. As the plane lifted off from Savannah, heading west towards the crescent curve of the Mississippi, Eleanor looked out the window at the receding coastline. For 4 months, every sunrise had felt like another day lost, another agonizing passage of time without their girls. But this sunrise, filtering through the clouds, felt different. It was a dawn pregnant with the possibility of answers, a fragile, terrifying, undeniable whisper of hope rising from the murky depths of the unknown. New Orleans, the Crescent City. Perhaps, just perhaps, it held the key to finally bringing their daughters home. The drive from Louis Armstrong International Airport into the heart of New Orleans was a blur of Spanish architecture, vibrant street art, and the distant, tinny strains of jazz music. But for Eleanor, Zara, Sarah, and Vivian, the city's famed energy was just background noise, an irrelevant hum beneath the deafening roar of their own anxiety. Their focus was fixed on the port, on the metal box that promised either answers or unspeakable dread. As they pulled onto the docks, the air changed. The sweet, damp scent of the bayou was replaced by the acrid tang of sea salt, diesel fuel, and something else, a faint, unidentifiable metallic odor that seemed to cling to the humid air. The scene was starkly illuminated by the harsh glow of floodlights, even though it was still mid-morning. A yellow tape perimeter cordoned off a large section of the sprawling industrial complex. Within it, a solitary shipping container, a rusted, nondescript hulk of steel, stood as the grim epicenter of their universe. Police cruisers and FBI vehicles surrounded it, their flashing lights casting an eerie, pulsating glow on the already tense atmosphere. Agent David Hayes and Agent Brenda Lee met them by the tape, their faces somber. "Ladies," Agent Hayes began, his voice low, "thank you for coming so quickly. We've just finished the initial assessment. The container was here, amidst a stack of others, but without proper documentation. A clerk, Frank Dubois, noticed it. He said something just felt off. He noticed a faint smell, almost imperceptible to others, but he's been working these docks for 30 years. As they stepped through the tape, a palpable chill descended despite the Louisiana heat. The container loomed, an inert, silent tomb. Its heavy metal door, now slightly ajar, seemed to whisper of secrets held. "We need you to identify some items for us," Agent Lee said gently, leading them towards a table set up a few feet away. On it lay a collection of objects that struck the mothers with the force of a physical blow. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Chloe's! That's Chloe's backpack!" It was a faded canvas pack with a distinctive patch from a student environmental club. She reached for it, her fingers tracing the embroidered outline of a cypress tree. Zara's breath hitched. And Layla's, her notebook, the one she carried everywhere. She picked up a small, spiral-bound journal, its cover slightly stained, and her eyes immediately went to the neat, precise handwriting on the first page. "It's hers!" Sarah reached for a worn, leather-bound journal, the spine cracked from frequent use. Her heart leapt into her throat. This is Maya's journal. She never went anywhere without it. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, seeing familiar sketches of wildflowers and eloquent prose about the beauty of the swamps. Vivian, silent until now, knelt beside the table. Her eyes fell on a brightly colored, hand-knitted scarf, intricately woven with shades of teal and brown. "Brooke's scarf," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I knitted this for her last Christmas." She clutched it to her chest, inhaling deeply, as if trying to find a scent, a trace of her daughter. Their daughters' lives, reduced to a handful of possessions, laid out before them. Each item was a fragile thread connecting them to the girls, a cruel confirmation of their presence in that sterile, desolate box. Agent Hayes gestured towards the inside of the container, where forensics specialists in white suits moved with careful precision. Inside, we found more. Makeshift sleeping arrangements, 4 deflated air mattresses, empty water bottles, discarded food wrappers, and some very old empty tin cans. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the distraught faces of the mothers. "It indicates prolonged habitation. Someone was in there, possibly for an extended period." A man in a crisp white lab coat, the lead forensic pathologist, stepped forward. His expression was grave. "Based on the state of the residue, the degradation of some organic materials we found, and the condition of the mattresses, I can tell you this container was inhabited for a significant amount of time, definitely longer than 4 months." He looked directly at the mothers, his voice softening slightly. "And whoever was here, they left in a hurry. There are signs of a rapid departure. It looks like someone was keeping them here and left in a hurry." The revelation hung in the air, chilling them to the bone. It wasn't a random disappearance. It wasn't an accident. This was calculated. This was intentional. Their daughters had been held here, in this silent steel cage. The possibility that they had been so close, yet unreachable for so long, ignited a fresh wave of agony, intertwined with a desperate, burgeoning hope. They were no longer searching for ghosts. They were searching for survivors. And the thought, however terrifying, propelled them forward. The sterile chill of the Port Authority office was a stark contrast to the humid, salty air outside, a practical, unfeeling space where paperwork replaced the raw emotion of the docks. Eleanor, Zara, Sarah, and Vivian sat stiffly on hard plastic chairs, the metallic scent of bureaucracy clinging to the air as they filled out forms, provided statements, and, most agonizingly, offered DNA samples to confirm what their hearts already knew. The process was slow, painstaking, a bureaucratic crawl against the desperate race of their own pulses. While Agent Hayes and Agent Lee moved efficiently, coordinating forensics teams and interviewing the port clerk, Frank Dubois, the mothers felt a familiar impatience gnawing at them. They were used to being active, pushing, demanding. Sitting still, waiting for official channels to churn, felt like an unbearable regression. Zara, whose lawyer's eye for detail was always on, scanned the busy office. Her gaze drifted past the various port employees, past the bustling FBI agents, until it landed on a familiar face near the coffee machine. Marcus Thorne. He was leaning against a filing cabinet, his usually impeccably tailored suit slightly rumpled, his charismatic smile a little too wide as he chatted with a port supervisor. He held a styrofoam cup, gesticulating expansively as he spoke. A jolt went through Zara. "It's him," she whispered, nudging Eleanor. Marcus Thorne. Eleanor's eyes followed Zara's gaze. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, quickly followed by a deepening frown. "What's he doing here?" The memory of Thorne was clear in all their minds. He was the smooth, polished face of Evergreen Expeditions, the organization that had promised their daughters a noble cause. Environmental work, conservation, making a difference. They had all met him at the university's volunteer fair months ago, a whirlwind of brochures and enthusiastic pitches. He had an almost mesmerizing charm, a way of speaking that made you believe in the grandness of his vision. Yet, even then, there had been a subtle unease. He'd always seemed a little too slick, a little too eager to move on when questions became too specific about logistics or safety protocols. They remembered how he deftly deflected questions about insurance and emergency procedures to a junior staff member when Sarah had pressed him. And he had, quite notably, never offered his direct contact information, always funneling inquiries through a general office line. He said they arranged the transport of some of their equipment through this port, Eleanor recalled, her voice low. But why would he be here now, at this exact moment? Sarah, who had been studying Thorne's animated conversation, narrowed her eyes. Look at him. He's trying to appear casual, but his shoulders are too stiff. He's talking too fast. As a historian, she developed a keen sense for the nuances of human behavior, the subtle tells that revealed deeper anxieties. We need to talk to him, Eleanor stated, her voice firm. Before the agents do, he might clam up if he knows they're involved or try to spin a story. Zara, ever the strategist, nodded. Agreed. Let's approach him casually, ask about the girls, see how he reacts to the news of the container. He hasn't been informed yet, right? She glanced at Agent Hayes, who was still absorbed in a conversation with Frank Dubois. Eleanor and Sarah rose from their chairs, their movements deliberate, a silent pact passing between them. They walked towards Marcus Thorne, a quiet, formidable force in the midst of the bustling port office. As they drew closer, they could hear his voice, a low rumble of confident assurance. He turned, saw them, and his smile faltered, a fleeting shadow crossing his eyes before he quickly reassembled his charming facade. But the mothers had seen it, a moment of surprise, perhaps even alarm, that solidified the first chilling whisper of doubt in their hearts. Marcus Thorne, his smile flickering, extended a hand to Eleanor. Mrs. Miller, what a surprise! And Mrs. Jenkins, what brings you to New Orleans? His tone was smooth, but his eyes darted subtly, assessing their presence. He tried to project an air of casual professionalism, but a faint sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed him in the cool, air-conditioned office. Mr. Thorne, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We just received a call from the FBI. They found things belonging to our daughters in a container here at the port. She watched him closely, every muscle in her face taut. A practiced mask settled over Thorne's features, a blend of shock and concern. My goodness, is that so? How absolutely dreadful. I am truly speechless. He pressed a hand to his chest as if genuinely affected. To think, after all this time. Sarah cut in, her voice sharper. What are you doing here, Mr. Thorne? Agent Hayes said this container wasn't documented. It just showed up. Thorne cleared his throat, subtly shifting his weight. Well, yes, that's precisely why I'm here. Evergreen Expeditions works with numerous shipping lines for our humanitarian aid efforts, primarily sending supplies to Central America. Occasionally, there are logistical mishaps, misrouted containers. I was just meeting with the port supervisor to clarify a manifest discrepancy for a shipment that was supposed to leave last week. A complete coincidence, of course, but a rather chilling one, given what you've just told me. He offered a sympathetic, almost pained smile. To discover that such a tragedy might be linked, however tangentially, to one of our shipping partners, it's truly horrific. His explanation flowed easily, perhaps too easily. He spoke with a practiced cadence, his eyes scanning the room, as if calculating his next move, rather than genuinely listening. As he spoke of humanitarian aid and logistical mishaps, his Adam's apple bobbed noticeably. He took a sip from his styrofoam cup, his grip on it visibly tightening. His gaze avoided their direct stares, flickering instead to the wall behind them, to the floor, anywhere but their anguished faces. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them. So you're saying this container has nothing to do with Evergreen Expeditions? Eleanor pressed, her voice laced with a subtle challenge. Not directly, no, Thorne replied quickly, perhaps a touch too quickly. Not in the sense that it was our container containing our equipment. This appears to be a rogue incident, a dreadful isolated event. He glanced pointedly at his watch. Ladies, I genuinely wish I could stay and offer more comfort, but I have a pressing meeting about this logistical issue. I must ensure our next shipment is not similarly compromised. Please extend my deepest sympathies to your families, and know that Evergreen Expeditions stands ready to assist in any way we can. He offered another fleeting, regretful smile, a nod that seemed to encompass all their pain. And then, with surprising speed, he extricated himself from the conversation. He offered a quick, almost dismissive wave to the port supervisor and then melted away into the bustling corridors, disappearing with the practiced ease of someone who didn't want to be found. He couldn't get away fast enough. The mothers watched him go, a potent mix of anger and cold certainty churning within them. "He's lying," Sarah stated flatly, the moment Thorne was out of earshot. "Every fiber of my being tells me he's involved. His whole demeanor, the way he kept looking away. He knows something." Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. The humanitarian aid excuse. It felt too pat, too rehearsed. They immediately sought out Agent Hayes and Agent Lee, who were reviewing notes near the forensic table. "Agents," Eleanor began, her voice firm, "we just had an encounter with Marcus Thorne, the director of Evergreen Expeditions. He was here, at the port." Agent Hayes raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism in his expression. "Thorne? Interesting. He often has business here, shipping supplies for his various programs." "He was incredibly evasive," Zara interjected, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. "He claimed coincidence, a misrouted container, but his body language screamed deception. He couldn't look us in the eye. He got out of here faster than a startled gator." Agent Lee flipped through a notebook. "Evergreen Expeditions has an impeccable record, ladies. Very well respected in the nonprofit community. Numerous awards for their conservation work. It's a multi-million-dollar operation, highly transparent." "Reputation doesn't mean innocence," Vivian said quietly, her voice resonating with an unexpected steeliness. "My intuition as an artist, as a mother, tells me otherwise. There was something profoundly wrong about him." Agent Hayes sighed, a hint of weariness in his voice. "We understand your concerns, truly, and we'll certainly look into Mr. Thorne's presence here. But without concrete evidence, circumstantial observations of his demeanor aren't enough to launch a full investigation against an organization like Evergreen Expeditions. For now, our focus remains on tracing the origin of this container and identifying who was last responsible for it." The mothers exchanged a look of frustration. They knew their intuition was right, a visceral certainty that went beyond mere logic. But they also knew the cold, hard realities of law enforcement. They were on their own for now in pursuing this unsettling new lead. The trail might have gone cold for the FBI, but for them it had just taken a dark, unnerving turn into the heart of a polished deception. The hum of the FBI vehicle felt strangely comforting after the emotional turmoil of the port office. Agent Hayes, driving with a quiet efficiency, sensed the shift in the mother's mood, their frustration with Thorne still simmering beneath the surface. He knew he couldn't dismiss their instincts entirely, even if official procedure demanded more. "We need to get you all a rental car," Agent Hayes announced, breaking the silence. "It'll give you more flexibility while we coordinate with the local authorities and expand the search for the container's origins." They drove to Delta Coast Rentals, a no-frills establishment tucked away on a side street, far from the tourist bustle. The air inside smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Mike, the owner, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, was behind the counter polishing a perpetually smudged glass. Agent Hayes introduced the mothers, briefly explaining their situation, omitting details about the container for security reasons. Mike's usual gruff demeanor softened slightly. Terrible business, folks. Truly terrible. As Agent Hayes finalized the paperwork for their rental SUV, Eleanor, unable to sit idly, began making small talk with Mike. "You must see a lot of different people coming through here, huh? All sorts of folks renting cars for all sorts of reasons." Mike chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "You betcha. From tourists to oil rig workers, though lately I had one group about 6 months ago give me a real headache. Young fellas, fresh out of college maybe, rented a big SUV, came back looking like it had driven through a hurricane." He shook his head, a wry grin on his face. "Mud up to the windows, dents on the side, sand everywhere. Had to charge 'em extra, course. Took us days to clean it." Eleanor's heart gave a sudden sharp lurch. 6 months ago. Her mind immediately flashed back to Chloe's last phone call, to the precise timing of their daughter's disappearance. "6 months ago, you said?" she asked casually, her voice betraying none of the internal tremor. "That would have been around May or June, wouldn't it?" Mike leaned against the counter, consulting a digital ledger on his computer. "Let's see. End of May. Memorial Day weekend, actually. Yeah, that was it. They said they were doing some kind of eco-tourism up in the swamps. Had a lot of specialized gear." The words hung in the air, a sudden, blinding spotlight illuminating a previously dark corner of their despair. End of May, Memorial Day weekend, swamp, ecotourism. The timing aligned perfectly with their daughter's vanishing. Zara, always quick to grasp connections, stepped forward. "Did you take photos of the damage, Mike, for insurance purposes?" "Sure did," Mike affirmed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Always do. Covers my backside." He turned the monitor slightly. "Here, take a look at this mess." The screen displayed a series of digital photos. A mud-caked dark green Ford Expedition, its tires caked with swamp muck, a noticeable dent on the passenger side door. The interior shots were worse. Footprints pressed into layers of dark, gritty sand, bits of dried leaves and cypress needles clinging to the floor mats. It was a tangible, messy echo of the very environment where their daughters had last been seen. As the mothers leaned closer, examining the details, Sarah pointed to a blur of color on the passenger seat, partially obscured by a discarded fast food wrapper. "What's that?" Mike zoomed in. The blurry object resolved into a small, distinctive package. Eleanor, Layla, and Vivian exchanged a glance of horrified recognition. It was a brand of male contraceptives, the kind sold in brightly colored, easily identifiable foil wrappers. Its presence in a vehicle ostensibly used for an eco-tourism trip immediately struck a discordant, deeply unsettling note. The image was fleeting, but the implication was stark and chilling. "Do you remember the name of the person who rented this?" Vivian asked, her voice tight, trying to maintain composure. Mike scrolled down. "Yep, it was booked online but picked up by a local, Silas Reed. Folks around here call him Swampy Reed. Runs a few tours, knows the bayou like the back of his hand. Bit of a character if you catch my drift." He offered a wink, oblivious to the grim implications of his casual revelation. Silas Swampy Reed. The name hung into the air, cold and heavy. This wasn't just a random person. This was someone intimately familiar with the very wilderness where their daughters had disappeared. Someone connected to a vehicle that bore the unmistakable signs of a clandestine, unsettling journey. The FBI might have dismissed their gut feelings about Thorne, but this new lead, dirty and disquieting, was a concrete thread that promised to pull them deeper into the murky waters of the truth. Agent Hayes and Agent Lee, while still maintaining their professional composure, acknowledged the significance of the Delta Coast Rentals lead. They assured the mothers that an official investigation into Silas Swampy Reed was being launched immediately. "We'll cross-reference his known associates, check his financial records, and put eyes on his property," Agent Hayes promised. "This is a strong lead, ladies. We'll pursue it with everything we've got." But for Eleanor, Zara, Sarah, and Vivian, immediately felt like an eternity. The hours since the discovery of the container had stretched agonizingly. Their daughters had been held captive, alive, just 4 months ago. Every passing minute felt like a betrayal, a further delay that could mean the difference between life and death. The thought of sitting idle while the FBI navigated bureaucratic channels was unbearable. "We can't just sit here," Eleanor declared, her voice firm, breaking the silence in the hotel room they had reluctantly checked into. "They're following official procedures, and that's good, but we have something they don't." "What do you mean?" Vivian asked, looking up from sketching aimlessly in her small notebook. "Intuition," Eleanor stated, her gaze sweeping over them. "And the girls' last known coordinates. Chloe's phone, Layla's GPS on her backpack. We know the general area where they were supposed to be doing their volunteer work. And we know Swampy Reed knows those swamps. He's a local guide," Mike said. "He would know the hidden places." Zara, despite her legal training, which usually favored evidence and protocol, felt a deep resonance with Eleanor's words. "She's right. The FBI will take time. They have to. We don't. And we have an advantage. We know the girls. We know their habits, their instincts. We can look for signs that a seasoned investigator might overlook." Sarah pulled out the laminated map of the swamp, the very one she had been poring over for months. She pointed to a cluster of intricate waterways far from any established tourist trails. "This is the section of the Bayou Evergreen expeditions listed as their primary survey area. It's remote, and if Swampy Reed was involved, he wouldn't take them to a well-trafficked spot." A plan, born of desperation and a mother's fierce love, began to form. They would go to the swamp. They would retrace their daughter's last known steps, guided by the cold precision of GPS data and the hot fire of their own desperate hope. The next morning, armed with a rented airboat, a detailed map, and a healthy dose of grim determination, they embarked. The airboat, piloted by a gruff but sympathetic local they'd managed to hire discreetly, cut through the still dark water, disturbing the mirrored reflections of the cypress trees. The rhythmic thrum of the engine was the only sound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of their racing thoughts. The landscape was otherworldly. Towering bald cypresses, draped in their eerie Spanish moss, created natural tunnels that the airboat navigated. The water beneath them, the color of weak tea, was alive with unseen life. Alligators, wary and ancient, slid silently from the banks. They saw the flash of birds, heard the buzz of insects, but the overwhelming impression was one of profound, ancient stillness. It was beautiful, but also profoundly unsettling, a place where secrets could easily be swallowed whole. They followed the GPS coordinates to the edge of the designated volunteer area, a dense section of cypress tupelo swamp. "This is where they were supposed to be working," Eleanor said, pointing to a particularly thick patch of reeds. "They were here. I can feel it." They spent hours meticulously scanning the banks, looking for any anomaly, any sign that didn't belong. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly, the humidity clinging to their skin like a second layer. Just as despair began to prickle at the edges of their resolve, Vivian, whose artist's eye was trained to notice subtle details, pointed. "Look," she breathed, her voice hushed, her finger extended towards a barely visible break in the dense foliage along a narrower, less accessible waterway. "Over there, beyond that bend, is that a dock?" Through the thick cypress branches, a faint, almost ghostly outline emerged. A dilapidated wooden structure jutting out into the murky water. It was far too small and rustic to be part of any official tour route. It was also too clean, too recently used for something that looked so abandoned. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen of oil shimmered on the water near its edge. Their guide, a man named Jean-Luc, whose family had been navigating these swamps for generations, cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the distant calls of unseen birds and the buzzing of dragonflies. "Never seen this place before," Jean-Luc mumbled, his eyes narrowed. "Not on any map I know." As they drifted closer, the structure revealed itself as a small, ramshackle boathouse or fishing shack, its walls weathered and leaning, almost swallowed by the embracing arms of the swamp. It looked deserted, forgotten by time. But the mothers felt a tremor of something else, an unnatural quiet, a lurking presence. And a powerful, undeniable instinct told them they had found something significant, something dangerous. Jean-Luc, their airboat pilot, had maneuvered the vessel with practiced ease, gliding silently towards the dilapidated boathouse. The structure, barely visible through the thick curtain of Spanish moss, looked like something forgotten by time, slowly being reclaimed by the swamp. Yet, as they drew closer, the subtle anomalies began to emerge, sharp and disquieting against the backdrop of ancient wilderness. The muddy banks leading to the crude wooden dock showed faint but undeniable, fresh tire tracks, wide, deep grooves that could only belong to a large vehicle, perhaps even an SUV. They were partially obscured by freshly broken reeds, as if someone had tried to cover them. Eleanor's gaze immediately darted to the width of the tracks, mentally comparing them to the image of the mud-caked Ford Expedition from Mike's rental lot. A chilling wave washed over her. As they stepped onto the rickety dock, a faint, almost imperceptible smell clung to the air, a mix of stagnant water, something metallic, and a lingering acrid hint of unburnt gasoline. It wasn't the natural scent of the swamp. It was alien, man-made, and sinister. Zara, her lawyer's precision evident even in this terrifying environment, pointed to a small, dark stain on one of the warped wooden planks. "Looks like oil, or perhaps grease, and fresh." Sarah, ever the observer, scanned the exterior of the boathouse. The windows were boarded up, but hastily, some planks uneven, allowing slivers of light to filter through. Near the entrance, half buried in the mud, she spotted something that made her breath catch. It was a crumpled piece of paper, wet and discolored, but bearing the unmistakable stylized logo of a green leaf and a winding path. The Evergreen Expedition's emblem. It was a brochure, or perhaps a leaflet, carelessly discarded. Sarah bent down, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a direct, undeniable link. "It's them," she whispered, holding up the crumpled paper. "Thorne's organization." A profound sense of unease settled over them, heavy and suffocating like the humid air itself. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an intrusion. They weren't merely investigating, they were trespassing on a hidden, dangerous ground. Suddenly, from somewhere deeper within the dense cypress grove behind the boathouse, came a faint, distant sound. A rustle followed by a muted thump, like something heavy being moved. It was indistinct, muffled by the swamp's acoustics, but it was there, unmistakably. Then a voice, low and gruff, too faint to discern the words, but undeniably male. Jean-Luc, who had been quietly observing, his eyes narrowed, put a hand on Eleanor's arm. "We gotta go?" he muttered, his voice urgent, his Cajun accent thick with a primal warning. "Now, there's folks here, bad folks." His weathered face, usually impassive, was etched with genuine concern. The mothers exchanged a terrified glance. The air crackled with a sudden, tangible threat. They hadn't come to find an empty hideout. They had stumbled upon something active, something alive and malevolent. The faint sounds, the male voice, the fresh tracks, it all coalesced into a terrifying realization. Someone was still using this place. Someone dangerous. The primal instinct of self-preservation, momentarily forgotten in their desperate search, now surged to the forefront. Their daughters were still out there, somewhere, and they couldn't help them if they too vanished into the swamp's treacherous embrace. With frantic urgency, they scrambled back onto the airboat, their movements clumsy with fear. Jean-Luc, his face grim, quickly pushed off from the dock, the powerful engine roaring to life as he spun the boat around. As they sped away, cutting a swift path back through the narrow waterways, Eleanor risked a glance back. Through the parting curtain of Spanish moss, she thought she saw a fleeting movement by the boathouse, a dark shape disappearing behind a towering cypress. It was too quick, too indistinct to be sure, but the image seared itself into her mind. They had found their answer, or at least the beginning of it. But in doing so, they had also found the chilling, palpable presence of the danger that had ensnared their daughters. The swamp had its secrets, and they had just scratched the surface of a very dark one. The airboat sped back across the dark, reflective waters, the wind whipping through the mother's hair. But they barely noticed. Their hearts hammered against their ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and desperate hope. The sight of the Evergreen Expeditions brochure, coupled with the sounds and movements from the boathouse, had erased all doubt. Their daughters were still out there, and they had just brushed against the very people who held them. Eleanor, her fingers shaking, pulled out her phone and immediately called Agent Hayes. "Agent, it's Eleanor Miller. We found something. We were at a remote boathouse, deep in the cypress. There were fresh tracks, and we saw movement. We heard voices, and we found an Evergreen Expeditions brochure. This isn't just an abandoned hideout. Someone is there now." Her voice was a tight, urgent whisper, every word infused with a desperate plea. Agent Hayes, initially wary of their unauthorized excursion, sensed the raw panic and conviction in Eleanor's voice. "Stay calm, Mrs. Miller. Are you safe? Can you give me coordinates?" He barked orders to Agent Lee, his professional detachment dissolving into focused urgency. Within minutes, the vast, silent swamp was pierced by the distant wail of sirens, growing closer, echoing across the water. A flotilla of airboats and smaller patrol vessels, led by Agent Hayes and Agent Lee, converged on the coordinates Eleanor had provided. Local law enforcement, alerted by the FBI, joined the rapid response. The scene that unfolded was swift and chaotic. As the combined forces of the FBI and the local sheriff's department swarmed the boathouse, the silence of the swamp was shattered by shouts, the thud of heavy boots, and a brief, intense burst of gunfire. The men inside, caught off guard, attempted to flee into the dense, unforgiving swamp. A desperate foot chase ensued through the knee-deep water and tangled roots. Within minutes, the skirmish was over. Silas Swampy Reed, recognizable from Mike's photo, was apprehended, his face a mask of furious defiance. Along with him, 2 other grizzled local men were quickly taken into custody. They were shackled and led away, their curses swallowed by the humid air. As the area was secured, Agent Hayes gave the order. "Clear the structure. Look for victims." The mothers, kept at a safe distance but straining against the police tape, watched with bated breath, their hearts in their throats. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then a shout ripped through the air. "We got 'em! They're alive!" A wave of dizzying relief, so profound it nearly brought them to their knees, washed over them. Inside the dingy, claustrophobic confines of the boathouse, hidden behind a false wall in a cleverly concealed compartment, lay Chloe, Layla, Maya, and Brooke. They were gaunt, their clothes tattered, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. But they were alive, bound and weak, but breathing, responding. The reunion was a maelstrom of tears, choked sobs, and trembling embraces. The girls, blinking in the harsh light, clung to their mothers, their faces pressed into familiar shoulders, as if trying to re-anchor themselves to reality after months adrift in a nightmare. Paramedics rushed in, wrapping them in blankets, checking for injuries, and gently guiding them towards waiting ambulances. At a New Orleans hospital, after being thoroughly examined and given fluids and basic nourishment, the girls began to tell their story. Their voices were weak, sometimes breaking, but clear enough to paint a horrifying picture. Chloe, speaking first, her voice raspy, explained how Silas Reed, under the guise of an Evergreen Expeditions field guide, had lured them to this remote section of the swamp. He had initially been friendly, knowledgeable, but then the veneer had cracked. They had been overpowered, drugged, and taken to the hidden boathouse. Layla, her eyes still haunted, described the endless days and nights in the small, dark compartment, the stifling heat, the constant fear. They had been given just enough food and water to survive, kept isolated from the outside world. Maya, clutching her mother's hand, revealed the chilling motive. Silas Reed, she explained, had been working for Marcus Thorne. He told us Thorne's organization used these volunteer trips as a way to find people, to find college students, not for ransom directly, not for money. But he hinted at other things. Selling us to wealthy people for who knows what. Her voice trembled, and she averted her gaze, leaving the implied horror to hang unspoken. A dark cloud in the sterile room. Brooke, surprisingly, was the most pragmatic. Thorne was the mastermind. Reed was just his muscle, his local expert. He used the ecotourism and humanitarian aid as a cover. The container in the port, they were moving others. They were going to move us. We just didn't know when. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. Evergreen Expeditions was not a charitable organization. It was a front for a sophisticated human trafficking ring, using the idealism of young volunteers as a cynical shield. Marcus Thorne, the charismatic director, was not a philanthropist, but a predator, his polished facade concealing a monstrous depravity. The horror of it was almost unimaginable, yet their daughters were living proof. They were alive. And now, the hunt for the architect of their nightmare could truly begin. With Chloe, Layla, Maya, and Brooke safe, the focus of the FBI's investigation shifted with electrifying speed. Their harrowing testimonies, combined with the irrefutable evidence found at the boathouse, the Evergreen Expeditions brochure, fresh tire tracks, and other forensic samples, provided the final damning pieces Agent Hayes and Agent Lee needed. The meticulous planning of a sophisticated criminal network began to unravel under the relentless pressure of law enforcement. Less than 12 hours after the rescue, Marcus Thorne was arrested. He was apprehended at a lavish New Orleans hotel, mid-breakfast, his smooth charm instantly replaced by a stunned, then furious disbelief. He tried to deny everything, to assert his innocence, to cling to the respectable facade of his charitable organization. But the evidence was overwhelming. In the sterile, unforgiving interrogation rooms of the FBI, both Thorne and Silas Swampy Reed were subjected to intense questioning. Thorne, initially arrogant and dismissive, found his carefully constructed lies crumbling under the weight of the girls' precise accounts and the tangible evidence from the swamp and the container. He lashed out, attempting to deflect blame, to paint himself as merely a logistics provider, ignorant of Reed's rogue actions. But the detailed financial records, the covert communications, and the testimonies of other lesser players in the network all pointed directly to him as the architect. Silas Reed, on the other hand, was a different kind of monster. Grimy and unrepentant, he offered little resistance, his coarse denials quickly giving way to a sullen silence. He seemed less surprised by his capture than by the audacity of the mothers to have found their hidden lair. He confirmed Thorne's involvement, admitting his role in luring the girls under false pretenses and holding them captive, awaiting instructions for their transfer. He spoke of a client network that spanned the globe, using the complex, legitimate world of international shipping to move their cargo. The investigation expanded rapidly, revealing a chillingly efficient operation. Evergreen Expeditions, with its humanitarian and ecological fronts, was a brilliant cover. It allowed Thorne to identify vulnerable young people, often those passionate about causes and eager for travel, and to utilize legitimate shipping routes and port connections without raising suspicion. The containers, seemingly for aid, were instead used for illicit purposes, their contents meticulously disguised and transported. The misrouted container that held the girls' belongings was not a coincidence, but a part of Thorne's calculated, if interrupted, plan to move them to the next stage of their captivity. The story exploded in the national media. News channels, initially focusing on the disappearance, now dedicated extensive coverage to the miraculous rescue and the shocking revelations. The public, captivated by the dramatic turn of events, devoured every detail. While the darker implications of Thorne's network were carefully hinted at without explicit, disturbing descriptions, the narrative largely centered on the extraordinary courage of the 4 college students and the unrelenting heroism of their mothers. Footage of Eleanor, Zara, Sarah, and Vivian, their faces etched with the raw aftermath of fear and triumph, was broadcast widely. They were hailed as modern-day heroes, their refusal to give up inspiring millions. Headlines screamed, "Mother's intuition cracks case," "Found alive," "College students rescued from bayou horror," "Charity front for criminal enterprise exposed." Agent Hayes and Agent Lee, while receiving accolades for their professional efforts, were quick to credit the mothers. Their relentless pursuit, their keen observations, and their refusal to let the trail go cold were absolutely instrumental in this rescue, Agent Hayes stated in a press conference, his voice tinged with respect. Without their determination, this outcome might have been very different. The focus on the mother's unwavering spirit and the successful interagency cooperation helped to manage the public's shock, transforming a horrifying crime into a powerful narrative of resilience and justice. For the world, it was a gripping story. For the mothers and their daughters, it was the first painful, yet profound step towards reclaiming their lives from the shadows of a nightmare. The web had been exposed, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room cast a sterile, almost harsh glow, but within its walls, a profound, tender silence had settled. The frenetic energy of the rescue, the police presence, the media frenzy outside, all faded to a distant hum. Now it was just mothers and daughters, reunited after an eternity of fear. Eleanor sat by Chloe's bedside, gently stroking her daughter's thin hair. Chloe, though weak, had managed a small, tired smile, her eyes still holding a haunted flicker. Layla, nestled against Zara's side, seemed to draw strength from her mother's familiar embrace, her usually sharp features softened by exhaustion. Sarah held Maya's hand, pressing it to her cheek, tears blurring her vision as Maya, too weak to speak much, squeezed back. And Vivian, her face a mixture of relief and lingering terror, kept a vigilant watch over Brooke, whose eyes were closed in a fragile, much-needed sleep. The immediate aftermath of the rescue was a blur of medical assessments and initial police statements. The girls, though physically depleted, were remarkably resilient. They had suffered from dehydration, malnourishment, and the immense psychological trauma of their captivity, but they were receiving the best care. The hospital staff, knowing the extraordinary circumstances, treated them with a quiet reverence, allowing the mothers the precious space to simply be with their children. "When I saw that dilapidated boathouse, and then you, Chloe," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I felt something shift inside me, like a compass needle finding north after spinning for months in darkness." Zara gently smoothed Layla's forehead. "We never stopped looking, sweetheart. Not for a single day. Not for a single hour. Your fathers, your friends, the entire university. Everyone was searching, but we knew. We just knew we had to keep pushing." Maya, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her usual thoughtful tone, stirred. "We know, Mom. Some nights in that dark container, I would feel you all searching for us. It sounds strange, but it gave me hope. I pictured you, Mom, with your maps, and Auntie Eleanor calling everyone. It kept me going." Her words, simple yet profound, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. The intangible bond of love had somehow transcended the steel walls of their prison. The path to healing, they all knew, would be long and arduous. The physical recovery was just the beginning. The psychological scars, etched by fear and isolation, would require immense patience, understanding, and professional support. There would be nightmares, moments of profound anxiety, and the daunting task of processing the trauma they had endured. But in that hospital room, surrounded by the unwavering presence of their mothers, a new beginning slowly dawned. The mothers, refusing to leave their daughters' sides, pulled chairs close to the beds, unwilling to be separated again, even by a few feet. They talked, they listened, they simply held hands. They were a shield, a comfort, a constant reminder that their girls were safe. Finally. Outside the hospital window, the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the New Orleans sky in hues of soft pink and promising gold. It was a fitting symbol for the new chapter that lay ahead. Recovery would be a journey, marked by small victories and inevitable setbacks. But in that room, filled with the warmth of an unbreakable love, 4 young women began the slow, hesitant, yet resolute journey back to themselves. As Vivian later wrote in her small, cherished journal, her hands finally free to create again. Today marks both an ending and a beginning. The search is over, but the healing has just begun. What sustained us through these terrible months? Love, determination, faith in each other. These will sustain us still. We found our daughters in a metal box at the edge of the sea, but the truth is, we never lost them. Not really, not in the ways that matter most. Months had unfurled like the broad leaves of a cypress tree in the humid Louisiana air since the day Chloe, Layla, Maya, and Brooke were pulled from the depths of their nightmare. The vibrant chaos of New Orleans had slowly welcomed them back, offering its rhythm as a balm. Yet the scars remained, etched not on skin, but on the deeper canvas of their souls. Chloe, back at LSU, found solace in her environmental studies, now with a renewed, almost fierce purpose. She channeled her energy into advocating for victims of human trafficking, her voice, once almost lost, now amplified by her experience. Layla, the meticulously organized one, pursued her law degree with an even greater dedication, dreaming of a career in human rights. Maya's journal, now a testament to both terror and endurance, became the foundation for a series of powerful, poignant short stories she began writing, her art a way to process and share her truth. And Brooke, ever practical, found comfort in physical activity, running miles along the levee, the rhythmic pounding of her feet, a meditation, a silent defiance against the stillness of captivity. Their laughter returned, sometimes tentative, sometimes robust, but always tinged with the memory of what they had endured. There were still difficult days, sudden anxieties, and nightmares that flickered like shadows in the periphery of their sleep. But the mothers, their own exhaustion fading with each passing week, remained their unwavering anchors. Eleanor, back in her Savannah flower shop, found herself often pausing amidst the vibrant blooms, a quiet reverence in her gaze. She thought of Chloe, of Layla, Maya, and Brooke. The journey had irrevocably changed them all. "The search is over," Eleanor mused one afternoon, pruning a wilting rose, her voice soft but firm. "But the healing has just begun. And it's a lifelong process, isn't it, for all of us?" She often spoke with Zara, Sarah, and Vivian. Their shared ordeal had forged an unbreakable bond, a sisterhood of resilience. Over countless cups of coffee, they had come to realize that their unique experience, their painful knowledge could be a source of strength for others. And so, the Cypress Compass Foundation was born. It was a modest organization at first, operating out of a small office generously offered by Zara's law firm. Their mission was simple yet profound: to provide immediate, tangible support and resources to families of missing adults, especially when official leads went cold. They offered guidance on navigating bureaucratic systems, connecting families with specialized private investigators, and, crucially, offering a network of emotional support from those who had walked a similar terrifying path. They shared their story, not for glory, but as a beacon of hope. They knew intimately the agony of not knowing and the sheer unbridled relief of finding. Eleanor, now the Foundation's quiet, steadfast leader, often reflected on the power that had driven them. "What sustained us through those terrible months?" she would ask, her gaze distant, remembering the endless nights. "Love, determination, faith in each other. These sustained us then, and they sustain us still." The bayou still whispered secrets, and the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean still held its mysteries. But for the Miller, Kahn, Jenkins, and Harrison families, the darkness had been pierced. They had found their daughters in a metal box at the edge of the sea, a place of confinement and despair. But the truth, the profound, resonant truth that echoed in their hearts, was this: they had never truly lost them. Not their spirit, not their hope, and certainly not the unbreakable bond of family. In the end, even in the deepest shadows, the unwavering light of love had led them home.